والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم ثبتنا عند الموت بلا إله إلا الله آمين يا رب العالمين. If you need more chairs, there's a lot more chairs here in the back also. You can grab chairs from the back. Please. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we're back with another session Friday night, and tonight we are going back to our series which is titled Evolution of Islamic Law. And what are we trying to understand in this particular series is how the different madhabs, how the different schools of fiqh, they developed over the centuries. Why are there differences between them? What was common between them? What is the correct approach of looking at these schools? What are the wrong ways of looking at these schools? And today, where do we stand and what's the way forward for us? We have already extensively dealt with the early evolution of Islamic law from the time of the Prophet ﷺ to the time of the Khulafa Rashidun to the time of the Umayyads, the first 100 years of the Umayyads, Banu Umayyah, and then now we are in the middle of the Abbasid period, and this is where the main schools of Islamic law really thrive and develop and are founded. In the past, we have looked at three schools of Islamic law already, namely, we have looked at the Hanafi madhab, its founder and how it got developed, the usul of fiqh, which were followed, the criterion of fiqh that was followed by Imam Abu Hanifa and his school. We've also looked at Imam Malik and his school of thought in Medina. Okay? And then last time we talked about a madhab that is still there in the world but is lesser known, and that is the Zaydi madhab, which is primarily practiced in Yemen today. Okay? And we talked about Imam Zayd, the founder of this madhab, and what was his understanding on fiqh and so on. So today we move on to two other madhabs. The idea being that today when we talk about madhabs, we only count four as the primary Sunni madhabs in the world, which are, what are the four primary schools of thought? Fiqh, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali, and Maliki. Right? So these are the four. But in the early centuries of Islam, around the Abbasid time, which is like 250 to 600 years after the Prophet ﷺ, the early centuries of Islam had literally hundreds of madhabs. So today we have four or five, but in the early centuries of Islam, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of madhabs. You can pull out chairs if you want. If you want more chairs, please pull out chairs. So today we talk about two of these lesser known madhabs, or madhabs which have disappeared now. We don't have these two madhabs followed anywhere in the world, but back in the day they were at par with the other madhabs. The Hanafi, the Maliki, the Shafi'i, the Hanbali, these two madhabs were also competing with those madhabs for popularity, for students, and so on. First one to talk about tonight is known as the Laythee madhab. The Laythee madhab. This is named after Imam al-Layth ibn Sa'd. The name of the founder or the scholar, the alim of this madhab was Imam al-Layth ibn Sa'd. And he lived from the year 716 to 791. When did the Prophet ﷺ pass away? We're talking about the Gregorian calendar here. Which year did he pass away according to the Gregorian calendar? 632. 632. Then we have 30 years of the Khulafa Rashidun. So that's 662, close to that time. Then we have about 100 years of the Umayyad dynasty, Banu Umayyah. So that's around 762. Okay, so he is born in that period, 716 to 791. This madhab was named after Layth ibn Sa'd, who was born in Egypt but was of Persian descent in the year 716. So where is this madhab thriving in that century? Which country, which location? Egypt. So he is an Egyptian scholar, but he is not an Arab. He is a Persian. And that tells you by that time how the mixing was going on. Students and scholars were traveling all over the Muslim world, going to learn to universities, and then settling over there and starting their schools over there. So even though he is not from the country, but he starts his school in Egypt and he becomes popular in Egypt. By the way, where was Imam Abu Hanifa? Just so that we recap. Imam Abu Hanifa is mostly in Iraq area. Okay, the Persian, Iraq, Kufa, Baghdad, that part of the. And then Imam Malik, I just mentioned it, Medina. So Imam Malik is doing his scholarship in Medina. And then we talked about, Imam Zayd, who is primarily in Yemen. Okay, he's in Yemen. And then what about the others? Imam Shafi'i. Imam Shafi'i, out of all, is probably the one who's moving the most. He starts off in Mecca and Medina in Hijaz area. Then he goes to Iraq, learns there. Then he comes to Yemen, learns there. Then he goes to Egypt, learns there. Then he goes to Syria, learns. So he is very he's not settled in one particular area. Shafi'i, Imam Shafi'i. And then Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal again in the Iraq area. Okay? But this one, the Laythi madhab, is where? In Egypt. Just so that we have a map, a mental map of where things are happening. He was contemporary of both Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik. In fact, he carried on a debate with Imam Malik by mail on the various points of Islamic law, one of which was Imam Malik's inclusion of the Madinite custom as an independent source of Islamic law. So he's a contemporary of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik. Okay, he's in that same era or the same time period. And he's having debates with whom? Imam Malik. How are they having these debates? They are in two different locations. Imam Malik is in Medina, Imam al-Layth is in Egypt, through mail. So that tells you from that early on, we're talking about the 8th century here, 700s. Muslim empire had already a mailing system in place, a postal service, okay, which was bringing messages and connecting different parts of the empire. In fact, you would be surprised to know that it was this time when the banking system was introduced in the Islamic empire, where you could actually write a check in Egypt and you can cash it in Afghanistan. That's what was happening. You can write a check in one part of the Muslim empire and you can cash it in another part of the Muslim empire. So that's how advanced these early Muslim centuries were, not just in the field of the deen, religion, but also in sciences and literature and other fields that were there, including business. So what is his main debate with Imam Malik? What is this issue of the customs of the Madinites? We have talked about it when we were doing the Maliki madhab. Anyone knows? What is something which is odd about Imam Malik which the others disagree with him on? Yes? No, that's a different issue. That's where Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa differed. And that was the issue where Imam Malik said that the scholars should be part of the government. Whereas Imam Abu Hanifa said scholars should be independent of government. They should not work under the government. Right? Both had valid points of view. Imam Abu Hanifa thought that if you work for the government, then you cannot critique the government. Your paycheck is coming from the government. And the scholars should be independent of that so that they can freely do their work. Imam Malik said, well, if you don't go in the government, how are you going to have good people in the government running the show? You have to have scholars part of the government so that they can advise the government and they can run the show according to Islam. So they differed on that point. But we're talking about the difference here between Imam Malik and almost all the other schools, including Imam al-Layth. And that was the issue of custom of what? Of where? Custom of Medina. So Imam Malik, he extended the definition of Sunnah. He said the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is not only the words of the Prophet and his actions, but also the traditions and customs of the people of Medina. Whatever happens in Medina is Sunnah, is part of the Sunnah. Okay, that's his understanding of Sunnah. What is his logic? Why did he think that Sunnah, Medina should be part of Sunnah? Because he said, this is where the Prophet taught. He lived 10 years here. He explained Islam here. This is where the Sahaba lived. So whatever the Sahaba's children are doing, everyone is doing it the same way. They must have learned it from the Sahaba, and the Sahaba must have learned it from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So even though we don't have a hadith about that, that still is sunnah. We should do things that way. The culture of Medina is part of the sunnah of the Prophet. That's his point of view. Almost all the other scholars disagreed with it. He said, no. This does not mean that if people in Medina are doing something in one way, that the Prophet is the one behind it. It could have been something they were doing before the Prophet arrived and still continues. It could have been something which developed after his death. You know, new traditions and customs are always coming and becoming part of a culture and so on. So they said that that cannot be taken as a source of Islamic law or sunnah. And that's where Imam al-Layth in Egypt is sending letters to Imam Malik in Medina, and they are having a debate. Imam al-Layth gives his points of view and evidences. Imam Malik, he responds to it and sends letters to him. And there is this very healthy scholarship going on, debate going on, which shows once again, very early on, the concept of freedom of expression was there. You could debate, you could disagree with each other, but not at the level of the commoners. See, this is the difference between Islam and the concept of freedom of expression which we find today in the West. In Islam, the freedom of expression is for the people of knowledge. You have to speak with knowledge, not just based on emotion. I think this is how it should be. No. You have to have evidences. You can disagree with other scholars, but you yourself have to be at the level where you can disagree based on knowledge. So it is knowledge-based freedom of expression, not just freedom of expression which has no strings attached, which is like unlimited and is for everyone equally. That's why even the voting system in Islam is different. Islam does not follow the secular democratic model. Okay? In Islam, the voting or the election is the people of knowledge. Their vote is going to decide, not everyone's vote, right? You can take shura from common people, but at the end of the day, it is going to be the people of knowledge who will decide who the next leader will be, who the imam will be, who will run what, because they are the ones who are most knowledgeable about issues, and they should be given this particular chart. Anyway, that's a different thing. So, do we understand this debate that was going on between Imam Malik and the rest of the ummah, the rest of the scholarship, including Imam al-Layth? Okay, so Imam al-Layth, he almost spent his entire lifetime in Egypt teaching. He has many students. He promotes, the knowledge that he has. He's imparting knowledge. Why don't we have this madhab today in the world? What happened to the Laythi madhab? What do you think could be the reason that it disappeared over time? Yes. His students did not document his knowledge. So you see, it's not just the brilliance of the main scholar. It also depends on the students who come afterward. What did they do with the knowledge? Did they document it? Did they spread it? What was their quality? Okay. Sometimes you could have a scholar who's not that brilliant, but his students might be more brilliant than him or her. And then they might spread the madhab or its teachings everywhere. So that's one reason. Any other reasons you can think of? Let's give others a chance. Yes. He wanted to go to another place? Well, he lived in Egypt. He did not move to another. But that's a good idea, yeah. If somebody moves, then of course, then their school of thought will disappear. Yes, brother. So the government did not support him. Okay. Any other reasons you can think of? Why this school disappeared? Yeah, but today even in Egypt they don't follow the Laythi madhab. That's the question, right? Where did it go? Okay, let's listen. Let's go over some of the reasons. Number one, he neither compiled, dictated, nor instructed his followers to record his legal opinions and their proofs according to his interpretations of the Quran the Sunnah, and the legal positions of the Sahaba. Thus, very little remains of his madhab beyond a few references in the early books of comparative fiqh. You have to understand, when all these great scholars were teaching, they were not thinking of developing a madhab. Imam Abu Hanifa is not teaching so that one day there will be a Hanafi madhab in the world. He doesn't even have the slightest idea that one day his teachings will form like a legal group and scholarship, and then they will all come together and they will call themselves the Hanafi. He's not teaching for that reason. Imam Shafi'i has no idea one day there will be a Shafi'i madhab on earth. They are just scholars who are teaching in masajid, in centers, in universities of the time, in schools of the time. So they actually have no interest in developing their schools as schools of thought. Their interest is what? Scholarship. Their interest is what? Research. Their interest is what? Teaching, imparting knowledge. That's what they're doing. They're not interested in, these tags and names and one day my madhab will become this or that. So that's why many of them didn't even record their opinion. Same thing for Imam Abu Hanifa, by the way. Imam Abu Hanifa told his students not to record his opinions. Said, whatever I am teaching you, don't record my opinion. Don't write them down anywhere. Because he said, maybe today I have one opinion and tomorrow I have more research and I change my opinion. Because fiqh is flexible. Fiqh is not sharia. Once again, we mentioned this at the very beginning. I want to keep stressing on the definitions of sharia and fiqh. These are two terms which we use interchangeably. We say sharia, we say fiqh, but they are not the same. Sharia are those laws which come from Allah and His Messenger. Those can never change. Nobody can change those. Nobody can say, instead of 5 prayers, let's, make it 3 prayers. Instead of Ramadan, rotating throughout the year, it's too hard, let's make it December. Short days, right? Umrah and Hajj, or Hajj, in summer is very difficult, so let's move it to January. We cannot touch those things, right? Because they are from Allah and His Messenger. That is called Sharia. That is fixed, that is timeless, that will continue forever. Okay? Yes, its application can be debated, where to apply it, how to apply it, those things. But fiqh is the laws that are derived from the Sharia. Fiqh are laws that are derived from the Sharia. They are not part of the Sharia directly. You have to extract those laws from the Sharia. And that's a human process. That's where scholarship and research comes in. And so many of these early scholars, they understood that what they are trying to achieve in fiqh is a human effort, and they could have errors. They could have errors. So actually, most of them, or at least the ones we know of, they were not interested in developing schools after them. It just happened to be. After they died, some of them became very famous in their areas, and their students spread the knowledge, and they became schools of thought over centuries. So that's number one. Do we understand this first reason? Any questions on that? That he never told his students to compile any books about him or write down his opinions or anything of that nature. Yes, brother. Hanafi, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The reality is, this is what I believe after studying this topic, is that if Imam Abu Hanifa was living today and he came, let's say, to Afghanistan, and he saw you were praying the way that he left behind, a fatwa that he gave, and now he found out that there is a hadith of the Prophet which says, no, it's not like this, it should be this way, he would be the first one to change his opinion. Problem is not with him. Problem is with us. We have become so rigid in the application and following of these scholars that we have actually elevated them to the ranks of nubuwah. The only one whom we blindly follow, we don't ask any questions about him, is who? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Anyone after him can make mistakes. Anyone after him, their opinions can be right, their opinions can be wrong. So the question that I need to ask myself and you need to ask yourself is, am I a follower of the truth and I will go wherever truth leads, or am I a rigid follower of a certain school, of a certain scholar, and so on. Second comment, as a common person, we don't have knowledge, that level of knowledge, right? Where we can compare evidences, see hadith, which hadith is authentic, which one is not, and so on. We can do some research, but we're not at that level of knowledge. So let's say you follow the Hanafi school of thought and you follow the fatwas that come from that. It's absolutely fine, as long as you know that you are doing it with the knowledge that this could be right or could be wrong. In your head, you need to know what I'm doing. I'm following these scholars because I trust them. They are the scholars I look up to, but they could also be wrong. They are human beings in their efforts. So as long as you're not rigid in your head when you follow them, and when you see other people following other opinions, you give them the room. Say they could also be right in what they're doing. I mean, I grew up in Pakistan. We follow the Hanafi. From a very young age, we were taught Hanafi school of thought, right? But after doing my own research and understanding these things, I have changed so many things in the way I pray. I have changed so many things in the way I do certain things, which I used to do in a different way. And that's the flexibility which these scholars taught us. So Imam Abu Hanifa was the most flexible of the people. He would have changed his opinion and updated his knowledge based on new research. You have to understand, in Imam Abu Hanifa's time, all the hadiths were not available to him. He is in Iraq. Iraq has only some Sahaba who went there. Some Sahaba went to Egypt with their hadith. Some Sahaba went to Syria with their hadith. Some Sahaba went to Yemen with their hadith. It was only after these schools had developed that people like Imam al-Bukhari, Imam Muslim, they came and they collected all the hadith together so that now it's available worldwide. But in their times, all the hadith were not available worldwide. So whatever hadith they had to work within that. And they were always looking for new research, always updating their opinions and so on. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so the second reason, what was the first reason that the Laythi madhab did not survive? Because there was no documentation of it. Okay. Number two, the number of students under Imam al-Layth was a small number, and since none of them became outstanding jurists, they were not in any influential position to popularize his madhab. So as I was talking earlier, it's the quality of the students also. He himself is an outstanding scholar, but none of his students reach that pedigree, that great influence in society after him. And if you don't have a continuous chain of outstanding students, what will happen after a couple of generations? Your teachings will be lost, or you will not be as popular as maybe other schools who have outstanding students who are continuing after them. So that's the second reason we don't have this madhab. A third reason is Imam al-Shafi'i, one of the most outstanding fiqh scholars, settled in Egypt immediately after Imam al-Layth, and his madhab quickly replaced the Laythi madhab. So you see, that's another thing. Imam al-Shafi'i ends up, after all his journeys, he ends up living in Egypt and he teaches there. So he becomes more popular and the older school is forgotten. Over time, his teachings are forgotten. It is interesting to note that Imam al-Shafi'i, who had studied extensively under Imam Malik and under Imam al-Layth's students, was reported to have observed that al-Layth was a greater jurist than Malik. This is the opinion of Imam al-Shafi'i. Imam al-Shafi'i has studied both schools of thought. He studied under Imam Malik as a student, and he studied under the students of Imam al-Layth. He never met Imam al-Layth, but his students. But after looking at their knowledge, both of them, who does he think was a greater jurist? Imam al-Layth. Imam al-Layth was a greater jurist in his opinion. But we don't have his madhab today. We have Maliki madhab today, right? So this is from Allah. This is from Allah. This also reminds me of when Imam Malik was writing his book, Al-Muwatta, which is a compilation of hadith and athar of the Sahaba. A lot of books were being written in his time. So somebody asked him, which of these books will survive the test of time? When you're writing a book, what will happen to this book 200 years after you? What will happen to this book 500 years after you? What will happen to this book 1400 years after you? Right? So he's being asked, which of these books will survive? And Imam Malik, he doesn't know the future. He's just writing his book like other scholars are writing. He said, the one which is written with the greatest sincerity. The one which is written with the greatest sincerity, Allah will put barakah in that book. so that it will survive the test of time. So Imam Malik, his madhab and his teachings have survived, maybe Allahu Alam, because his sincerity level was so high that Allah put barakah in that work. Even though maybe from an intellectual point of view, from a fiqh point of view, Imam Shafi'i, he thinks Imam al-Layth is a greater scholar than Imam Malik, and Allah knows that. And all of them were tremendous scholars. Any questions on the Laythi madhab? We good? The second madhab we want to talk about is the Thauree madhab. Another madhab was the Thauree madhab. This is named after the famous scholar Imam Sufyan al-Thauree. Sufyan al-Thauree. He was born in the year 719. Okay, and he died in the year 777. He was born in Kufa in the year 719. There's an interesting story about him which I have narrated before also. I'll mention it again. The person who made him who he is, a person whom we don't know in history, and her name is not known, is the mother. There's a great mother behind this scholar, okay? Behind the scenes work going on, which we cannot see, but she needs to be recognized whenever we talk about Imam Sufyan al-Thawri. She was a widow, okay? Imam Sufyan, his father has passed away, and she is a young widow. She could have remarried and moved on. She has children from her husband, and she dedicates her life to the development of these children. Instead of getting married and continuing with her life, she says, I want to dedicate my life to developing these children. Now she has all these children and they have different talents. So what she would do is she would quiz them. As they are growing up, she's testing which child is good in which area. See, this is what we call today aptitude. Okay, you have 5 children and you say, this one is good in science, this one is good in medicine, this one is good in, sociology, this one is good in Quran, this one is, you have different talents in the house. So she is testing to see who is the smartest of her children. And then she found it was Sufyan. Her son Sufyan was the smartest of all her children. And she decided, I'm going to dedicate him to Islamic scholarship. Okay? And this brings the point that I always make, is today one of the reasons for us being in a state of intellectual decline in the Muslim world is because the best minds are not put towards scholarship, Islamic scholarship. Today it's the opposite. It's the opposite. You have 5 children and the one who cannot answer any question, they have no academic exactly. Exactly. So the one who is a failure in life, gets all the poor grades, not doing well, oh, put him in the madrasa. At least he'll memorize the Quran. Put him in Islamic scholarship or her in Islam. So we are pushing our worst intellects towards Islamic scholarship. Whereas in the early centuries, it was the opposite. Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, his mother is saying, he is my best child, smartest child that Allah has blessed me with. I'm going to dedicate him to Islamic scholars. Today, we want our best minds to go in engineering, in medicine. Why? Because we're thinking dunya, 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 dunya. Right? Money, good job, status. She is thinking of something else. There were great mothers in that era, which produced that generation of great scholars. Today, if we want to return to the greatness, we have to become great parents. We have to be pushing our best minds towards Islam. Not our failures. Because imagine what will happen to that failure in life when he or she becomes an Islamic scholar and people come to ask fatwa from him or her. What kind of fatwas are going to come out of these brains? Because Allah has not blessed these brains with that sharpness, with that understanding, with that fiqh, with that wisdom. You have to have the best minds become Islamic leaders and imams and scholars and so on and so forth. So anyway, she dedicates this son. She's a widow. She doesn't have Islamic background. So she sends him to study in the centers, the big centers in Kufa and Baghdad and the Hijaz. And so she sends him away with somebody. Somebody is going. She says, take my son. And Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, he learns and he becomes a great scholar of his time. And then after 17 years, he returns home. After 17 years of long, rigorous knowledge seeking, he returns home. It's late at night and he knocks on the door. He's very happy. He's going to see his mom now, right? After 17 years. And the mom comes out and says, who is it? And he says, Sufyan. And she says, who Sufyan? Right? This is your son, the one you sent. Remember? Said, what are you doing here? Mom is not happy to receive the son. What are you doing here? Like, I came back. You sent me. I am back now after achieving these great results that you sent me for. She says, what are you doing here? Go back. I don't want you here. I want you to be serving the ummah. And once I dedicate something to Allah, I don't accept it back. Don't show me your face. Go serve the ummah. Your job is to become an alim and be in service of the ummah. She doesn't even welcome him inside the house. He returns there from that. I mean, can you imagine a mother like this? You cannot imagine, right? This is like, these are special mothers. Special mothers. Okay? Their hearts are dedicated to Allah 110%. They don't want any emotions in the way. She is afraid maybe if she sees her son, she might want to keep him now. Doesn't want to send him back. She wants him to keep serving the ummah. Go and do your work. That's what I sent you for. So this is how these greats of the ummah became the greats, because there was in the shadows, hidden in the background, a great mother, a great sister, a great father, a great grandfather, somebody in the family, an inspiring teacher. It's like Imam Abu Hanifa, he was walking down the streets of Iraq as a young merchant, and he passed by the circle of the greatest scholar of his time, Imam Shabi. Imam Shabi was a great scholar before Imam Abu Hanifa in Iraq. He's the direct student of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, from the Sahaba. Very close to that chain, right? Next to the Prophet. So he's teaching, and Imam Abu Hanifa just passes by, and Imam Shabi, he says, come here, my son. He says, I see marks of intelligence in you. You look like an intelligent person. Why don't you dedicate yourself to Islamic knowledge? Imam Abu Hanifa said, my head was blown. He's the greatest scholar of Iraq. He stops me and says, you are so intelligent, you should become an alim of Islam. He said, I left everything. I started sitting in circles of knowledge and became the Imam Abu Hanifa he became. See, one comment can change the life of a youngster. One good effort on the part of a community member, an elder, a brother, a sister, an aunt, an uncle, a teacher. That's how teachers are so important. Teachers can change your life. The way they teach, the way they inspire. And he never even became his student. Imam Abu Hanifa did not become the student of Imam Shabi. He became the student of another great Imam, Hamad, who's also a student of Imam of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. So inspiring people around you. You see a youngster, say something good to them. Maybe something will happen. Maybe that will change them to go towards Allah and become the greats of our time. We need our Imam Abu Hanifas. We need our Imam al-Bukharis. We are missing those in our time. Where are they? If we are not going to put in the effort as parents, as community members, we are going to be on the losing end. So that is little story of Imam Sufyan al-Thauree. So as I said, he's born in Kufa, and after extensive study of Hadith and Fiqh, he became the main scholar of the Hadith school in Kufa. He held similar views to those of his contemporaries, Imam Abu Hanifa. However, he opposed the latter's use of qiyas and istihsan. So what's his difference between him and Imam Abu Hanifa? Both are in Iraq, in the same area. He says he does not agree with two things that Imam Abu Hanifa does. Qiyas and istihsan. What is qiyas and istihsan? We have discussed them before. Qiyas we should all know. So what are the four main sources of Islamic law? The scholar would use Quran, the scholar would use Sunnah, then the scholar would use Ijma, which is a consensus of Islamic scholars, and then Qiyas, number 4. Okay, what is Qiyas? Anyone knows? Yes. Yes. So exactly. In English we say analogy. Analogy. In the Sharia, there is something which is haram. Allah has made it haram. And now we have a new thing. We want to decide if it's halal or haram. This thing is similar to this thing. So what the Islamic scholar would do, say these two things are analogous. They are we can compare them. And so their ruling has to be the same. And a good example of that is drugs. Allah does not mention anything in the Quran or Sunnah. The Prophet doesn't say anything about drugs. Okay? But alcohol is forbidden in the Quran. So the scholar would say, why did Allah forbid alcohol? Because it does what to your mind? Takes away your mind. What do drugs do also to your mind? Same thing. So drugs should also be then haram, forbidden. So this is called qiyas, where you look at something which is already there in the Sharia and compare it to something new in your time, and you reach a conclusion, reach a rule. So Imam Abu Hanifa used a lot of qiyas, whereas Imam Sufyan al-Thauree, he is not a big fan of qiyas. Because why does he have a criticism? He says, this is your thinking that they can be compared. Maybe they cannot be compared. Okay? Allah didn't say that this is the same as this. You are saying this is the same as this. You could be right, you could be wrong. So he was not a big fan of these comparisons. Okay? But the problem with not using it is then you close the door to new issues. How are you going to find out new issues? Are they right or wrong? So Imam Abu Hanifa, he used qiyas, and the majority of the scholars used qiyas. What about istihsan? Istihsan has to do with rulings that have to do with public welfare. Public welfare, even if it goes against a hadith which is weak, or it goes against qiyas. So you compare two things and you reach the ruling. Okay, this old thing was haram, this new thing is similar to it, so this new thing also needs to be haram. But Imam Abu Hanifa would say, wait a minute, yes, they are similar and both should be haram, but if we make this new thing haram, it's going to cause big damage in the community. Make it very difficult for the people to follow Islam. So he said, no, we'll keep this halal. Okay? So that is called istihsan, or public welfare. When you look at the masses and say, if a new ruling is going to make things easy or is going to make it hard on the people. Example is, for example, in Islam, one of the sales which is forbidden is sales where you do not have the material ready and you take the payment. I'm going to sell you this phone. I better have a phone in hand to sell you, right? I'm going to give you this, get the payment. What is forbidden is, I've not even made the phone yet. I say, Brother Khalifa, give me $500 and I'll give you the phone. I don't even have the phone with me and I'm selling it to you. That is forbidden in general. Okay? But the hadith is about food items. The hadith of the Prophet is you cannot do this with certain food items. So the scholar said, because you cannot do it with food items, you shouldn't be doing it for any other thing. So it should be forbidden. But now, in our time, for example, when a company is selling fighter planes, okay, I'm not going to make a $1 billion plane first and then find customers for it. I first have to find a customer who's willing to buy it and give me maybe some payment, and then I'm going to start manufacturing the plane. So if this ruling was followed, it would make it very difficult in society to have the manufacture of these planes. I'm just giving an example here, right? So you follow the general ruling unless it makes it very difficult upon people to practice it. And if it makes it very difficult, then there is this concept called istihsan, which Imam Abu Hanifa believed in and used, and other scholars also use. These are normal for all schools of thought. But who is the one who is against it? Sufyan al-Thauree. He doesn't like istihsan and he doesn't like qiyas. He wants to stick a little bit strictly to the Quran and the Sunnah and not go in these different directions. Okay, so that's his understanding. There occurred between Imam Sufyan and the officials of the Abbasid state a series of confrontations due to his outspoken nature and his refusal to support state policies which contradicted the Sharia. So there was a Khalifa known as Al-Mansur, very famous caliph of his time. He sent a letter to Imam Sufyan al-Thauree requesting him to accept the post of Qadi or judge of Kufa on the condition that he will not make any judgment or ruling in opposition to the state. See, so the Khalifa is saying, we'll make you judge of Kufa. Only thing we ask you is don't say anything against us. We'll let the Khilafah work, let the Caliph do his work, like nothing against us or our policy. On receipt of this letter, Imam Sufyan al-Thauree tore it up and threw it into the Tigris River in disgust, but as a result, he was forced to give up his teaching and he had to run for his life. So now he is in trouble with the government because he just tore the letter up and he threw it into the river because he's like, this is disgusting what you're asking me to do. And then the state was against him and he had to run for his life. He remained in hiding until he died in the year 777. So he died in that state of hiding. He never came out of hiding. What do you think are the reasons for the disappearance of his madhab? We don't have today a Thauree madhab in the world. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. Very good. So his students are afraid because our scholar is on the run. He's being chased by the state. So who wants to be part of this madhab? If you want to be part of the madhab, you will be thrown in jails. You will be persecuted. So political reasons primarily behind the disappearance of this madhab. The Imam spent the greater part of his life in hiding and thus was unable to attract large number of students who might subsequently spread his opinions in the circles of learning. Although he did carry out some fairly extensive compilations of hadith and their interpretations, he requested in his will that his main student, Ammar ibn Saif, erase all his writings and burn whatever could not be erased. Once again, same attitude. He doesn't want his knowledge, his opinions to survive after him. He tells his main student, after I die, erase everything you can, whatever I have said from my personal opinion, or you burn it. Because they are afraid. They know that what they have said is human effort. They don't want to leave behind something which might be wrong. This is due to taqwa. Today it's the opposite. We would want, yes, yes, please, Facebook posts. Put it everywhere on social media that I said this, my khutbahs, my knowledge, my this, my classes, put it everywhere, spread it everywhere. Because we are seeking dunya. We are seeking the world. We are seeking popularity. We're seeking, acknowledgement from people and so on. The early generations were different on this issue. Ammar dutifully destroyed his teacher's writings, but many of the Imam's ideas were recorded by his students and the students of other Imams, so they have survived till today, but not in an organized form. So we have his knowledge, some of his knowledge has survived, but we don't have any books dedicated to it or proper organized works dedicated to him. Any questions on the Thauree madhab? Yes, brother? Primarily to food items, yeah. But it's better not to, so it's not recommended to do it even in other areas. But because, as I said, the scholars say if we implement this rule and stretch it to other areas, it's going to cause great hardship for people. Because these days the way business is done is this way, right? You have to know I have customers first, and then you have back orders and you kind of supply those. So the scholars have put some kind of leeway there. There is leeway there. There's flexibility in this issue. But definitely food items there are yeah, is there. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's what I'm saying. So this would come under istihsan, public welfare, making it easy to do business for people. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, brother. Because they are perishable. Food will get bad after, especially back in those days they didn't have any preservation like the way we do today, which is part of the reason we have bad diets is we preserve food forever and we want to eat it even after months and months and months. So in their time, if you are selling apples, for example, and you don't even have apples, they're still on the trees, or you are planting those trees right now, what's the guarantee if the weather is not going to come and take them away? You already took my money. And now there is no guarantee that I will get the apples, right? So for food items, because they are dependent on weather, because they're dependent on crop, those kinds of things, there's no guarantee that you will actually have them. Maybe there is a fire which burns the harvest. What will happen then, right? So in order to guarantee accountability, you are accountable. When you take my money, you better give me the product that you have promised me. And if you cannot do that, then you should not take my money. That's the basic idea. They did. So many scholars did that and they reached one conclusion. Other scholars didn't do it and they reached a different conclusion. That's why I'm saying this is the reason why there's differences between opinions. Some scholars will go behind and say, what's the reason? And then let's compare it to other issues. And that's where qiyas will come in. Other scholars like Imam Sufyan al-Thauree is not a fan of qiyas. He's like, no, how do you know that this is the reason Allah said it is the way it is? That you're making up the reason in your mind, right? It could be that reason. Maybe there's other reason. For example, alcohol is forbidden, right? The reasons Allah mentions in the Quran about alcohol are because, they'll take you from dhikr of Allah, because they'll impact your salah. Those are the primary reasons. But for us, we know there are other reasons, medical reasons. Mind goes away. There's a domestic violence related to alcohol. How many people die every year due to alcohol and so on. So only Allah knows what are the other reasons behind alcohol being forbidden, right? Any other questions? Good? Are we good? Okay, want to quickly, we have about 20 minutes, so I want to start on the next big madhab now, and that is the Shafi'i madhab. Okay, so this one will take a little bit more time because it is relevant even today. So let's talk about it, at least the beginning, begin talking about it. This is named after Imam al-Shafi'i from the year 769 to 820. So he's a little later now. The earlier two that we mentioned, they were in the early 700s. Now he is 769, the latter part of the 8th century. The full name of this scholar after whom the school of legal thought has been named was Muhammad ibn Idris. So that's the name of Imam al-Shafi'i, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. He was born in the town of Gaza on the Mediterranean coast of what was then known as Asham in the year 769, but traveled to Medina in his youth to study fiqh and hadith under Imam Malik. He succeeded in memorizing the whole of Imam Malik's book, Al-Muwatta, and recited it to him from memory, word perfect. So Imam al-Shafi'i actually went to Makkah first. He went to Makkah to study under the scholars of Makkah, and then he found out that there is a great scholar in Medina, Imam Malik, one of the best of his time. So he said, I want to go study under him. But Imam Malik, he's very strict. Imam Malik, he doesn't like anybody to join his school of thought. You have to have what you call placement test, right? What's the placement test of Imam Malik if you want to be his student? Memorize his book. You have to memorize his book. Have you ever seen a copy of Muwatta? It's this thick. This thick. I mean, you're memorizing all the hadiths in it, all the athar in it, all the opinions of the Sahaba in it. It's not an easy task. And Imam al-Shafi'i, he goes to his house, knocks, with one of the other scholars. So what do you call that? Wasita? He has a recommendation, a reference. So this scholar takes him to Imam Malik and says, this is a brilliant boy I want to introduce to you, and he wants to be your student. Imam Malik is like, I don't take students like that, right? So he's, no, just give him a chance. And right there in front of him, Imam al-Shafi'i starts, reciting to him or reading his Muwatta, his book. And Imam Malik is highly impressed by him. So he immediately takes him under his wing. And now Imam al-Shafi'i, he starts developing his scholarship. His first big teacher is Imam Malik. As I said, he has many teachers because he moved a lot, in the ummah. So he memorized it, word perfect. Imam al-Shafi'i remained under Imam Malik until the latter died in 801 Common Era. Also, it is said that Imam al-Shafi'i used to take certain kind of memory boosting kind of pills, because he was into scholarship and he wants to memorize everything. And it is said that he even went to Yemen to just learn how to memorize. Techniques of memorization, right? Today in our times we have Lumosity and those apps, memory sharpening apps that you do or exercises that you do, right? In his time, there were other ways of doing that, and he learned the techniques of, memorization. In memorization, some kind of thing that will boost his memory. Maybe there is caffeine in it. I don't know what he was taking, coffee pills or something to stay awake. I don't know. Allahu Alam. Halal, brother. Halal pills. No haram pills, for Imam al-Shafi'i. So Imam al-Shafi'i remained under Imam Malik until Imam Malik died in 801. This was another rule, by the way. in that time, which has changed since then, is that in those times, if you were to go under a scholar, you are going to be his student until his death. Okay? Not leave him until he dies. So Imam Shafi'i is with Imam Malik and he has to wait if he wants to go to another scholar or if he wants to take the position of Imam Malik. He cannot do it until Imam Malik passes away. So he stayed as a student for many, many years. After the death of Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i went to Yemen and then he learned there and taught there. He remained there until he was accused of having Shiite leanings in the year 805 and was brought as a prisoner before the Abbas Caliph Harun al-Rashid in Iraq. So some people accused Imam Shafi'i, he's no longer on the Sunnah. He has sides and become a Shi'i scholar. So Imam was arrested in Yemen and he was brought all the way to Iraq, in front of the Caliph of the time, Harun al-Rashid, who was another famous Caliph of the Abbasids. Fortunately, he was able to prove the correctness of his beliefs and was released. Imam Shafi'i then remained in Iraq and studied for a while under Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan. Who is Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani? One of the main students of Imam Abu Hanifa. So Imam Abu Hanifa's main student, one of the main ones was Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. So Imam Shafi'i now becomes his student. So he learned the Maliki madhab, then he went to Yemen, learned the fiqh there. Now he comes to Iraq and learns the fiqh of the Hanafi school of thought. So he is a student of the Hanafi school of thought. So he studied under Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, the famous student of Imam Abu Hanifa. Later he travels to Egypt in order to study under Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, the famous, under Layth ibn Sa'd. He travels to Egypt in order to study under Imam Layth, but by the time he reaches there, Imam has already passed away. So we talked about Imam Layth, right? He was the main scholar of Egypt. So Imam Shafi'i then travels all the way from Iraq to Egypt to study under Imam al-Layth, but by the time he reaches Egypt, Imam al-Layth has already passed away. So then what does he do? He was able to then study the madhab of Imam al-Layth from his students. Imam Shafi'i then remained in Egypt until his death in the year 820 during the rule of the Caliph al-Ma'mun. So what is the journey of Imam Shafi'i? Can we begin again? Starts in Mecca, Medina under Imam Malik, Yemen to study fiqh of Yemen, then taken as prisoner to Iraq. He proves himself innocent, comes out, becomes the student of Ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who is the main student of Imam Abu Hanifa. Then he travels to Egypt to meet Imam al-Layth, but Imam al-Layth has already passed away. Then he learns the fiqh of Imam al-Layth from his students, and that's where he settles finally, and that's where he dies. Any questions on his life journey? Are we good? Imam Shafi'i combined the fiqh of Hijaz, the Maliki fiqh, with the fiqh of Iraq, the Hanafi thought, and created a new madhab which he dictated to his students in the form of a book called Al-Hujjah, the evidence. So that's his first book of fiqh. What is this book about? It is a merger of two madhabs. The two madhabs he had studied, the Hanafi and the Maliki. So let's listen to the adhan. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. Allah. لا إله إلا الله اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة والدرجة الرفيعة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته وارزقنا شفاعته يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. Alright, so Imam Shafi'i writes his first book on fiqh. What is the name of this book? Al-Hujjah, okay, which means like the evidence or the criterion. What is this book about? It is a merger, a combination of the Hanafi and the Maliki madhab. Okay, this period of his fiqh scholarship is known as the Madhab Qadim, the first or the earlier madhab of Imam Shafi'i up until this point. Then he goes to Egypt and studies the Laythee madhab, and once he studies the Laythee madhab, he wants to update his knowledge. So he writes a second book now, and that is called the essence. And in this second book, he reverses, changes many of his opinions that he had in his first book. Okay, so this is, I want us to appreciate this. He writes a book in which he makes certain statements, then he updates his knowledge, he goes to Egypt, he learns more hadith there, which he did not know before. He updates it, writes a second book. And this book has completely different or opposite opinions of what he wrote in the first book. Meaning he doesn't have these problems like we have today. Once we say something, we want to stick to it, and we have ego problems. Even when we find out we are wrong, we want to keep arguing and arguing. Now, Imam Shafi'i doesn't have that issue. He is willing to admit what he wrote in his first book was wrong, because he did it based on the evidence he had at the time. Now he has more evidence, so he's updated his opinions in his second book. And so this book then was called the Madhab Jadid, or the new madhab of Imam Shafi'i. That's why a lot of times when you read opinions of Imam Shafi'i, you'll find there's two opinions. One, his earlier opinion on an issue, and then a later opinion on the same issue. Also, Imam Shafi'i, he wrote a book called Ar-Risala. And this book is the very first attempt to make a structure out of fiqh, the Usulul Fiqh. It's the first book on Usulul Fiqh. Okay, the principles of how to make fiqh. So this is like a guide for scholars who are becoming scholars, students of knowledge. When they become scholars themselves, what are the processes that they need to follow? What are the principles that they need to follow in order to make new fiqh? So it's a book on how to do research and come to conclusion. It is known as Ar-Risala. Any questions on Imam Shafi'i's two phases, the books he wrote, and the updates that he had? Yes. Because when he was learning in Yemen, Yemen was primarily dominated by the Zaydi madhab. The Zaydi madhab is classed as a Shiite madhab, right? Even though it's probably out of all the Shiite madhabs, it's the closest to the Sunni. So it's like kind of at the border there. So he was learning from their scholars. So people said, oh, because he's learning from Shiite scholars, that means he has become a Shi'i. Okay, he's a Shi'i. So he's no longer, his beliefs are no longer correct, and he's no longer, following the correct opinion. So that's why he was imprisoned, or he was arrested and taken to Iraq. But there he was able to prove to the authorities that he still believes in the Sunnah, and he's not deviated from the path. So it was basically a rumor that was spread about. Any other questions? Yes, brother. No. The Zaydis, as I said, there is a Zaydi madhab in Yemen. They follow Imam Zayd and his teachings. We talked about him in a previous session. But from these four, they don't. They don't follow any of these four. They have their own imams and their own, their own books that they follow. Yes, brother? Is there anyone? No. Imam Malik never left Medina. Yes. That was when Imam Abu Hanifa used to come to make Hajj. So Hajj was the time where all the scholars would get together from the different regions, right? So there are stories, very amazing stories of Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa in Mecca. They are doing Hajj together, and the whole night they spent in a tent with debating a small point of fiqh. And then in the morning, if you were to see them come out of the tent, they are sweating. They're sweating because the whole night they have been discussing knowledge and learning from each other. But then when they would come out, they would praise each other. Imam Malik would say, there is nobody I have met with more wisdom than Imam Abu Hanifa. And Imam Abu Hanifa would say, I've never met somebody who has more knowledge and more grounded in Islam than Imam Malik. So they had huge respect for each other, but they differed on several points. But when it came Salah time, they're praying together. See, this is the key here. Today, we don't do that. Today is like, oh, that's your scholar, your imam, your masjid, you go there, I'm going here. This is Pakistani masjid, that is, Arabi masjid, that is, Turkish masjid, that is this masjid. This is not from the earlier scholars. This is something which we developed later on. We need to go back to the attitude of these early ulama. Yes, they would. They would. Imam Malik is reported one time he was, in a masjid where they were following the Hanafi way of praying. So he had, in a Hanafi, you put your hands right here, right? Imam Malik, he would pray with his hands on the side. Maliki madhab, you don't fold your hands, you put your hands on the side. So somebody saw him with his hands like this. This is Imam Malik, the founder of the madhab. It's like, I thought you pray like this. He said, yes, I do, but I am in a masjid where they follow this other opinion. I don't want fitna here. I don't want a fight to start here on this issue. So even though he disagrees with this, he doesn't think this is the right way of praying. He thinks this is the right way of praying. But he changes it for the betterment of the ummah, to keep the ummah united. Yes. There are hadiths. This is part of the sunnah of the Prophet. The Prophet ﷺ is reported to have prayed with his hands on the side. Yes. This is authentic. The question is, how did Imam Malik know that you can pray with your hands on the side? So there are hadiths of the Prophet. The majority of the times, though, he prayed with his hands side. But there are reports which mention that he prayed with his hands on the side as well. Any other questions? Okay, there was a question online quickly, or a comment rather, and that is, a brother Nathan online is saying, Assalamu alaikum. In analogy, can't we say that if it is not forbidden, then it is allowed? Yes, you can, and that was probably the approach of Imam Sufyan al-Thauree, because he did not believe in analogy, or he did not like using it. So according to him, if Allah didn't mention it, if the Prophet didn't mention it, then it must be okay for you to do it. There is no need for you to make analogy. But the other scholars, they said, no, Allah and His Messenger did not mention everything that is going to happen in the new forms of things happening, right? Things will change, cultures will change, people will change the way they do things. So the Quran and the Sunnah does not cover each and every detail of every culture and every, change that will ever take place. So you have to make analogy. The new things will come and you have to make analogy, and based on the analogy you would declare it either right or wrong. And Allah knows best. Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll stop here. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.